Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's Substack Live at the Sustainable Media Center. So my name is Emma Lemke, and I serve as the Director of Gen Z Advocacy at SMC. And I am so honored to be joined today in conversation for the second time this month with Steve, SMC's Executive Director, and Nikki Petrosi and Sarah Gardner. So Nikki, as we've mentioned, is a digital activist, a host of Scrolling to Death podcast, the Heat is On podcast, co-founder of the Tech Safe Learning Coalition and the Scrolling to Death Foundation. And Sarah is also a fiery digital activist, founder and
Mhm.
CEO of the Heat Initiative, and co-host with Nikki of the Heat is On podcast. So not only are these two outstanding women phenomenal activists, but they have recently become the leading voices as it relates to the LA Los Angeles lawsuit that is going on right now, something here at SMC that we are tracking very, very closely. So, as mentioned last week, Nikki has this press pass, so she's in the courtroom observing, taking notes, and in general bearing witness to this historic trial in real time. But now we're bringing Sarah into the conversation. So, before we jump in and talk more about what's happening in the past week with the lawsuit, Sarah, can you walk listeners a little bit more through how you got from all of this advocacy work to the trial and just how you got into advocacy in the first place?
Yeah, it's a great question because we actually had long conversations, both Nikki and I and others in the field, about how critical it was for someone to cover this trial day in and day out, every second. Interestingly, no media outlet really, other than Nikki, has been that consistently in the courtroom. And the reason that we feel that it was important to kind of capture every moment is because of the historic nature of this trial, but also because we're learning things in real time and we're hearing from the companies in a way that we haven't heard from before. And so, even something that someone representing a company says in the courtroom, no matter how it gets used or not used in the trial, we all, as activists and people in the field, are educating ourselves about the way they talk, the way they think, the way they make decisions, and then we can take that information and apply pressure in other places. So that was why we made this commitment to having Nikki there, and it was a it was an important decision because it's been a lot of time and energy, and also, like you said, though, our voices are kind of documenting each moment. But what I would say about our voices is that they're actually representing voices of so many more, including the survivor parents and young people who've gone through and experienced these harms directly. And our job, we see, is to just elevate those and make sure they're platformed throughout this whole process.
One of the things that I heard you guys say, and I wanted to just talk a little bit more about is, you know, Media 101 is the person who's there to talk to the cameras is going to win the argument. And it's fascinating to me to watch in what is effectively the spin room that they have nobody making their case.
Oh
Sarah
my
has
gosh.
been talking about this. Go, Sarah. It's
Well, no,
crazy.
I've just been shocked by how little game media Meta has had media wise. They had no plan. And I actually think that speaks to the arrogance of the company and really the arrogance of Mark Zuckerberg because he genuinely believes that he can go through this entire process. We can see all these documents, we can read these conversations that are really ugly in terms of their decision making and things that they said and things, talking about trying to get kids younger than 13 on the platform. And his belief is that Meta will withstand all of that, even in the court of public opinion, and that they don't need a plan because people will keep using Instagram and people will keep. And so it's an interesting question because it's the arrogance. I mean, Nikki, I'd love for you to weigh in too. We can't
Mm-mm.
quite figure it out, but we have been just in terms of media game that day that Zuck testified. I mean, the slew of press that we had, um, capturing the parents' voices who were there and sort of uplifting this story about how important this is and how damning these things are against Meta and Mark. And they had no spin. You're right, Steve. It was genuinely shocking.
They are reacting to the same level that they have reacted in the past to like a report coming out about how teen accounts doesn't work. Like they'll put out this new update to their right now their update this week. Meta was last week was that they are sending alerts to parents if teenagers search for suicide or self harm content some amount of times in some amount of time frame. Like they don't give details, and it wasn't even implemented yet. It was going to be a week or two later. And so it's just a lackadaisical reaction. And it was shocking. And I did talk about that with Brian Boland, who's a Meta whistleblower, who Sarah and I had on the podcast. And we have that full conversation coming out in a few days. But Brian actually was a witness in this case. And so we were able to talk about, he testified right after Mark Zuckerberg and kind of was able to respond to some of Mark Zuckerberg's testimony and Meta's reaction to this entire situation.
So talk us through a little bit more about who exactly was on the stand this week.
Sure. So we had YouTube executive Christos Goodrow for about 2 full days. He's been with the company for 15 years, I think 12 of those with YouTube specifically, and he's an engineer, VP of engineering. We had a data science expert named Dr. Chandler, who has studied, whose job was to look through the millions of internal documents, and explain to us the math and the science behind ad revenue and how the company reaches ad revenue specific to minors. And then we had Kaylee's therapist, Victoria Burke, who was her therapist for about 6 to 7 months back in 2019 when Kaylee was 13 years old. And then we had Kaylee herself take the stand for nearly 2 days. And then we had a little bit of time with another therapist who will come back next week. So there was a lot going on this week.
And what was the most surprising thing? Specifically, I want to look at the beginning testimony of the YouTube executive. What surprised you the most? Was it the arrogance? Was it similar to Zuckerberg in that regard? What were the differences too, again, between those executives?
Oh, man. It was the arrogance. It was, everyone in the courtroom had this visceral reaction of frustration and anger to his attitude and the way he was reacting. And he was arrogant. He was frustrated to be there and showing it. He was laughing a lot, like, this is ridiculous. And so just the overall attitude of not taking this seriously was frustrating. And then he said a number of things that shocked everybody. Like, he thinks it's completely fine for kids to spend 5 to 6 hours a day on YouTube. In fact, his children do. And it was just the things that were coming out of his mouth was shocking to everyone in the room. The arrogance was shocking. Yeah, that it was just tough. It was a tough couple of days.
Yeah.
We were happy to see him leave. Sorry.
Well, also just one, obviously not as well trained as Mark. Mark
Right.
is like very, very, very well trained, which makes sense. But the other thing is that something to just mention is a lot of the tech execs have gotten locked into a schedule and then been able to keep their time in court, and it's been scheduled and not moved. So many of the other experts on the plaintiff side and Kaylee herself, Kaylee's family, the therapists, have all had to move around based on these tech execs' time on the stand. And so they're just, even that in and of itself, sort of the inequity of people's
Mm-hmm.
time and energy spent leading up to these moments, which is another reason why then to sort of be cavalier about it or to have that tone, I think, and especially
Mm-hmm.
when we're talking about such serious outcomes. And of course, we know that these outcomes extend beyond Kaylee as an individual, too. These extend to so many other millions and millions of kids. So to treat it sort of as an annoying thing he has to do versus seriously, I think is part of the reason why it rubs so many of us the wrong way.
And, like, I remember thinking when you told me that Kaylee testimony was pushed back a day, just I felt so badly for her to be sitting in essentially a conference room for a day, twiddling your thumbs
Mm-hmm.
and anxious and uncomfortable. That seems like an awfully mean strategy, like a, rattle, the, yeah.
When she's already diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, allegedly because of these platforms, and she not only had to wait a full day, go home, come back the next day, and then it's just, yeah, it was, I'm sure, a lot for her.
And I think it speaks to her bravery, too. I
Mm-hmm.
know Brian touched on that. We all talked about that on the episode a lot, but this is no small feat for her. It's also no small feat for some of the experts coming in or the researchers or the therapists
Mm-hmm.
to be cross-examined by these high-powered tech lawyers who are trying to discredit what you're saying and poke holes in something. Again, it's just so everyone who's going through this process is incredibly brave, including so many of the survivor parents who really turned their lives upside down to be at the trial. And that presence has been really, really important. It was important the week before the trial started when it got pushed back and delayed, and us keeping the momentum up and keeping people talking about it. And then it was important the first week it went, and when there was no lottery system and they were sleeping outside the courthouse, because it just goes to show how much this matters to people. And I think, hopefully that's a signal that gets through the media too. Steve, I know you were talking about sort of like what's the larger takeaway for the public about the case. And one thing that we want people to take from the case is how invested many, many families are in the outcome of this case, not just even Kaylee's family.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing Jonathan Haidt show up, and I mean, I know John a long time, but I've never seen him that emotional. I mean,
That was such a powerful day. I agree, Steve. I had never seen him um, show his emotion about the issue like that and speak on it. And something shifted that Friday morning with the families and with him there, because he's always like making the academic case, right? And he's been on every show recently too. It's like, this is not a correlation, this is causation. And it's, I know his role in our movement is to like really land that, so people start to realize that it is a result of like social media and the exposure, not just happenstance. But this was a moment where he got to speak more as like a human, a person to person, someone in front of all these people who've had such tragedies. And I was really grateful that he came and did that with us. We'd been coming off of a really intense week of a lot of different actions with the survivor parents, and them seeing him emotional bolstered them and gave them such comfort, that this person that they all really respect and who's doing all of this hard work going around fighting back on their behalf at sort of this academic level, what could also be there with them on a human level.
so what's I've lost track of, it's a 6-week case, it's an 8-week case, it's a 12, like where are we on the arc of it? As much as we know the answer to that.
Yeah, so jury selection started January 27th, and the judge would like it to be done by March 20th. That is the date she's given to the jury to be available until. And so this week, we just finished week 5, and we're beginning week 6. That includes jury selection, which went on for, I think, about 2 weeks. So it's a long haul. I've been getting asked that too. Like, where are we at? Why is this not done yet? And we haven't even turned it over to the defense to call their witnesses. So we have several weeks left.
Yeah, if we've learned anything, you can't bet on a timeline. Everything is moving. Also, Nikki now wakes up at 4 a.m. That's just where, and goes to bed at 8. So we've
Yeah.
adjusted our lives to make sure that we can be there for the entirety of it. But it's unfortunately, we probably can't know exactly when it'll be over.
Yeah.
So who's getting called next week? Do we know what Monday looks like?
We have a good idea of next week. So we're going to resume with one of her therapists. Let me grab the list here. With Dr. Baggett, who is actually a therapist who diagnosed her with social media addiction, Kaylee. So we're going to hear more from Dr. Baggett. Kaylee's mom, Karen, will be called. And I heard potentially another data expert, but also for sure, meta whistleblower Arturo Bejar.
So Arturo's amazing, and
Mm-hmm.
his story about his daughter and his direct interactions with Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's ever been heard at the level it's going to be heard when he puts it on the stand. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I agree. I've been saying to him forever, you need a second sort of wave of attention as the whistleblower that you are, because
Mm-hmm.
he he was always rooting for them to get it right. And he helped them get it right, or much, much better, for a really long time. And his groundedness in the fact that they could be making different decisions that would have different outcomes, and like but technically how that would be possible, and just therefore how much more tragic it is that they don't. It's so rational, it's so logical that I agree. I feel like he is extremely compelling because he reaches people at the level of helping them realize one of the things that Mark tends to perpetuate is this idea of like it is what it is, and like you have to accept the good parts of meta with the bad parts of meta, that you can only have one with the other, right? So some bad things will happen so that the majority of us are like having a good time. And Arturo's point is actually no, the product could be designed differently so that actually everybody's having an even better time, and you don't have to have that harm. You don't have to accept it, and it ends up being like such a rational, logical idea that I'm hopeful that the jury in particular latches on to him as a person and his background, but also his way of answering questions and his way of bringing people along, and how meta falsely sets up fake, decisions that we have to make as a society that we actually don't have to make if they made better ones.
I would add that his technical expertise plus the experience with his daughter is really moving. And he came up with Brian Boland in our interview with Brian Boland. Brian worked with him many years ago and talked about how brilliant he is. And so if Arturo's saying these tools are broken, they're definitely broken. We definitely need to hear from him. And Arturo's another one who's been waiting in the darn holding room at the courthouse for days, and it is torturous. So yeah, he was supposed to testify several days ago. And so we're eager to hear from him.
So Emma and I were talking the other day, and we acknowledge that neither of us are attorneys, though Emma has a community of attorneys around her. I asked the rhetorical question, is it possible? What happens if the jury finds that Meta is guilty and YouTube is not? Is there a split decision that could come out that way, or are they tied together?
Well, it could be even more complicated than that because I believe there's like 6 different counts. So they could be guilty on some and not guilty on others, and for varying companies. So we don't know, and Sarah and I have been talking a lot about that and how we move forward with whatever that verdict will look like. I think there's going to be wins either way because there are so many opportunities for a guilty verdict. But we keep talking about how we've already won by getting through those courtroom doors, getting access to what's going on behind the scenes. The court of public opinion is shifting. And so we're going to lean on that, but we definitely hope to see guilty verdicts on both sides. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
Only that if, for instance, YouTube is not found guilty, I don't, of course, the narrative will be like, oh, now they're absolved of it. And there are other cases coming to where the harm caused to a child by YouTube, perhaps is even more um, intense or linked, and other types of harms. And so this would definitely not mean that YouTube is off the hook in any way, shape, or form.
That's the big point, is this is one case out of thousands of cases. And so YouTube is a defendant again in the next one that will start within weeks after Kaylee's.
And for those who want to follow your work, where should we lead them to? Is it the podcast? Is that the best place? Your Instagram, Nikki?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the email list is best. And I keep hearing from moms, especially, who are like, thank you for sending emails almost every day because I don't want to be on Instagram anymore. And so that's the best option at scrolling2death.com/heat. And then also we're giving some updates over on LinkedIn and Instagram as well. And so any of those spots. But really, there's been hundreds and hundreds of people subscribing nearly every day. And there's so much interest. And that gives us a lot of hope that we're going to see real change.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for being on. We appreciate your insights and all that you're doing, especially waking up at 4 a.m. to be able to cover something like this.
I'm just
So,
on your time now. I'm living on Eastern time.
yeah, exactly. But thank you.
Anytime you want to move to New York, we have room for you. The city's,
Oh,
come on down.
and 3 children?
Of course.
Okay.
Absolutely. I guess I just want to say in terms of a thank you, it's like, Emma and I started talking in November about this 2026 year of change. And we had a thesis that there were enough things that were going to happen that were all aligned but not sequential, that we really could begin to move the Titanic away from the iceberg. And sitting here today, I'm so appreciative of what you both do. And people don't understand all the logistics of like all those families didn't just magically show up. Like they have to put the time in, but all that has to be organized and coordinated, and people have travel and childcare and all these issues. And to see that line of parents all standing there with those photographs, it's just like that's what it takes. That's what it takes.
I have chills.
Thank
It
you.
really was
Me
so much
too.
work. Sarah and Shelby at Parents Together have really been leading that front. So thank you to
Amazing.
Sarah. Yeah.
No, I really appreciate you saying that. That means a lot because it is, and actually the reason why those photos have gone everywhere and are now like used in every story is because of all the unseen work behind the scenes of getting all the reporters there and getting everybody organized and also constantly checking in with these families and making sure we're doing it how they want to do it. That is so fundamentally important to us. This is their fight, and it's our job to like bolster them up and support them. And I think they feel that power now too, and they know how to tap into it. And they also know they don't need to take an interview at 1 a.m. if they don't have to that day, because they're going through their own journey. I think you've probably seen, or we talked about on the podcast, if you think about especially the families who've lost a child at the end of this, even if the verdict is exactly how we want it, right? And it's the beginning of like you said, the wave is starting to happen and the shift is starting to happen. Like those kids are not going to come back. Verdict yes or verdict no. And mentally preparing for that too, I think, of just knowing how profound that moment is and um, how important it is for the future families and their families, but also, their child won't be able to take part in it is something that we've started to talk about a lot too. So, anyway, just to say, I appreciate your gratitude, but we're all part of the fight, and you all communicating with your audience about it and keeping people apprised is so, so important. And so, thank you for having us on today.
We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, guys.